Today is Thursday, March 20th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. President Trump is moving forward on his plans for the Department of Education. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Subscribe, leave a rating. You know the drill. You can email us as well. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. Right to our inbox. We'd love to hear from you. We're all getting through the news of the cray here each and every weekday, bright and early. And today, joining me, CBN's Billy Hallowell. On the Focus, Billy, pro-life activist Kristan Hawkins' journey to leading students for life for America is a fascinating one.
Yeah, we're going to get into that journey and some of the overarching debates that go on in the pro-life movement today.
All right, looking forward to the details there. On the main thing, President Trump's new DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. It's making a lot of headlines, but is it even constitutional? CBN's David Brody breaks it all down. Coming up on the main thing. All right, the news in 90 is coming up right after this.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem, and the city is restless. The people of Israel welcome Jesus as king, his followers ready for revolution. But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! How will you escape being condemned to hell?
Experience Holy Week like never before.
What have you done?
Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen, Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
All right, appreciate our friends at The Chosen. Trey's actually there getting some interviews ahead of season 5, so looking forward to that as well. But we're going to move to the news in 90 now, and President Trump moves to abolish the Department of Education. He's following through on his campaign promise to dismantle the department, claiming it's full of radical leftists and Marxists. Instead, the administration's aiming to return power to the parents and states. He's set to sign an executive order arguing the agency has failed students while pushing radical ideologies. Linda McMahon, the new education secretary, is going to oversee the transition. Critics, including teachers' unions, oppose the move, but Trump insists it's time for universal school choice. Congress must approve a full shutdown, making the fight far from over. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says negotiations with Hamas will now happen under fire, vowing to keep up military pressure until all hostages are released and Hamas is eliminated. Some hostage families are pleading for a ceasefire, fearing their loved ones will be killed, but Netanyahu argues military action is the only way to secure releases, pointing to 196 hostages freed so far. Meanwhile, the IDF has issued evacuation maps to Gaza civilians. And March Madness is here. The NCAA tournament has long been an American favorite, and millions filling out brackets each year. And the tournament starts tonight. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out those stories and more at cbnnews.com. Well, I mean, technically it already started. They do like a play-in game now. It used to be 64 teams to start, but now they do a play-in game to get that 16 seed. So those games are happening, but the main final 64 should start tonight. We also should note that the Liberty Flames made the tournament this year. They won their league championship in a comeback victory that got them a seed. They're a 12 seed, and they're going to face the 5 seed Oregon Ducks. And I know you're not the hugest sports guy, Billy, but there's always, every year it seems that there's a 5-12 upset. So when you're picking your brackets, it's kind of one of those things that you're supposed to pick a 5-12. I mean, I think I got a good one for everybody to pick here. You know, you pick those Liberty Flames to see if they can get to the second round. But always cool to see this tournament starting. But a lot going on, including the Department of Education, as we mentioned, Billy. So, yeah, a ton of crazy stuff going on. I'll let you comment on whichever one you want, because I know you're not the biggest sports guy in the world, you and Trey.
Well, I like sport. I mean, I like sports a lot. I like to play. I like to, but I just don't have the energy to like create brackets and dive into like fantasy sports.
Yeah,
I mean, I barely
right.
can function in my day to day. So,
Yeah.
you know, yes, but I think the Department of Education piece is super interesting because this is obviously going to be challenged. But this idea of shrinking government, which we've talked about a lot, I think it's super compelling. It's something people have promised for years they were going to do. Nobody's ever really done it. I think it's trial and error, you know, but the reality is when you have thousands of people working in a department, a department that really, I mean, the Department of Education's task is to make sure that children are learning. When your nation continues to fail and you fall further and further and further down the list of countries, you have to start asking, what are we not doing right? And so if you've got thousands of people in an agency, I don't know, and that agency is not performing, perhaps it does need a little bit of a reboot. So I am interested to see where this goes.
Yeah, and it does seem that education has always been best when it's on the local level. And so trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger with the Department of Education just doesn't seem to be working, and it's just common sense. And so taking a different look at this and not doing things as a status quo seems to be, like you said, because of these results, seems to be fairly warranted at this point. So we'll see what happens there. We'll keep you updated on it on cbnnews.com. We're going to head to the focus story now, and pro-life activist Kristan Hawkins' journey to leading Students for Life for America. Like we said at the top there, it's definitely an interesting one. So tell me about the story here.
Yeah, we had a chance to sit down with Kristan and really talk through. A lot of people know her videos, they see her content, her viral interactions with students on campuses, and they see, the pro-life journey she's been on, but they don't really know where it started. And so that was one of the things we had a chance to talk about, that her pro-life activism, she was actually raised in an evangelical home and started going into a pro-life pregnancy center as a volunteer when she was just a teenager. And she said it was meeting the women. She had this unique opportunity to become a counselor very early in life, and that seeing the women who were very desperate, they had no one to talk to, that was something that wasn't lost on her. And it was sort of the roots of her going on to found Students for Life of America and to then start those meaningful conversations. And so when you see somebody like her, I often wonder, like, where did this come from? Like, what made this person want to do this? Because she's not your run-of-the-mill activist. She's somebody who shows up and she argues, and she does it calmly. And I was kind of asking her a little bit about that. She said, I have a unique gift of not being afraid to have people scream at me. And that made me laugh a little bit. I was like, that's interesting. She said, that she's not afraid to get yelled at on a campus and to say what she's actually thinking. And she said, in this day and age on social media, that does really well. And so that's actually helped her organization really grow and thrive, because these clips go viral of her just calmly interacting with students who are freaking out on her, but she's often just making very viable points about life.
And the arguments and the debates don't only come from the pro-choice side. So what else does she face and discuss?
Yeah, this is interesting, and this is a debate right now within the pro-life movement itself. And so, a month or so ago, she was sort of being accused of all sorts of different things from different people in the pro-life movement. Really, the issue is over this, whether or not the fight should be. And this isn't a new fight, but I think it's kicking up into high gear, whether or not abortion should be abolished entirely, and that should be the goal, or whether or not you need to do an incremental approach where you're trying to sort of chip away at abortion legally, putting on caps at 5 months, doing these other things that would help you sort of work your way back, of course, towards an eventual ban. But she has taken a lot of heat because some critics have said she's wrong, particularly when it comes, she often will talk about women as being victims when it comes to abortion, that they've been lied to, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but basically she's been accused of having blood on her hands for taking the positions that she does, even though she is pro-life, because she doesn't take that hardline stance on, of course, she wants to see abortion be unthinkable and not legal. She's more willing to advance bills and support bills that get further towards that, if not necessarily an outright abolishment of abortion, though. And so we talked a little bit about that, and she said some of these groups that are big on abolishing abortion, they seek the complete end of abortion and punishment for everyone involved. And that's the other sticking point. She does not support punishing women who have an abortion, right? And that's another piece of this puzzle when we talk about the debate. And there are two sides to it, right? She would say those in the camp that want to punish, they don't believe someone is anti-abortion unless they agree with every one of these parameters.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the incrementalism versus, because I think the end goal would be the same for both of them. If you talk to both sides here, they would like to see abortion gone, but it's how do you get there? And the abolish side says that you just got to push for just getting rid of it altogether right away, whereas others in the pro-life movement feel that you have to incrementally take the wins where you can get them and then move closer to it that way. And so that's a debate that's been happening. But how does she respond to the notion that a total abortion ban is possible?
Well, yeah, there's a number of things here when it comes to the incrementalism and all of that. I want to say this because this was interesting. She said if you were facing like a burning orphanage and there's children burning alive and you're only one person and you can only go in, every reasonable person would say you would go into that orphanage and you would save as many children as you can. You would call for help. You would call 911. You would ask people on the street, come and join me, save all the babies. But no reasonable person is going to stand on the street and be like, well, I can't save all the children at the orphanage, so I'm going to let them all die. And she said that is exactly what these folks are saying that we should do when it comes to legislation. And she's criticizing the abolish side. And of course, there are other arguments, that they would make against what she's saying there. But basically, when it comes to whether or not this is possible, she said the American public is just not where the public is right now. Like, it's not possible. She said it's actually completely out of the realm of possibility at this moment in 2025 America, except for a miracle from God Almighty, which is always possible, that you would see a complete end of all abortion. So I think she's looking at the polling and the reality that Americans are not on board. Like, there's actually no viable way to get there legally right now. Of course, she left it open to a miracle that it could happen. So she doesn't see that as being possible. And I do think that's interesting. And I'll say too, one of the biggest arguments she made for not punishing women for abortion, she talked about men. Like, are we not going to punish the men who decide they want women to have abortions too? Is it only the woman who gets punished? Which is not an argument I'd actually even thought about on this. If your goal is to punish the woman, well, you're going to have to punish the man if he's part of it too. And how do you even prove the woman knew she was killing her baby? How do you prove all of these things? She said it just opens this can of worms on the punishment side that she seems pretty uncomfortable with. She called it a logistical nightmare that does not make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting debate because, you would hope that everyone on this side of the issue is still understanding at the end of the day that, they're on the same team. And that's why it's a little troubling to hear some people saying that she has blood on her hands. Like, that feels a bit extreme on that front, while both sides, I'm sure, have, good points and counterpoints to make on the approach and which approach is better. I mean, you'd hope that at the end of the day, people could rest knowing that, all right, we're trying to achieve the same thing here. None of us like abortion and want it to go away. And so, it's just a different approach in how we do it. And so hopefully the infighting there can stop and, you just make your case and move on.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing. Everybody's on the same side, right? She wants to see abortion be, knocked out entirely too. And it is an interesting argument that it is true right now. And I know people don't want to hear this. The public is not on board. If you went to the American public and said, here are your options, ban abortion entirely or leave abortion entirely, the public is going to vote to leave abortion entirely. That's just the reality of where we are right now. That could change tomorrow. We could have a revival that could, but I think your point is right. Kristan and these other folks, they're on the same side. And she also said, look, she's being called fat. She's being shamed, that people are going after her. And she's like, the world is watching the pro-life movement tear each other apart right now. She's like, this is not a good look for any of us to be out there attacking, personal looks and all these other things over a disagreement on strategy.
Yeah, I feel like as soon as you go ad hominem, you sort of lost the argument there when you have to go to personal attacks and insults and things like that. It feels like you may be out of points to make, and you should go back to the drawing board on that. But glad you caught up with Kristan. It's always good to catch up with her and the work she's doing there. So appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today, Billy. And we'll keep tabs, obviously, on the pro-life movement, as we always do over at cbnnews.com. All right, is DOGE constitutional? We'll have a discussion on that coming up in 30 seconds.
Let me tell you, the God's gonna cut you.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem. Crowds welcome Jesus as king. Rebellion is in the air.
Jesus operates outside our jurisdiction.
Rome will descend on us all.
But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of thieves.
The world will never be the same. Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen: Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
All right, we're going to move to the main thing now. And President Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, is making a lot of headlines. But is this chainsaw for bureaucracy, as Musk calls it, is it constitutional? Well, CBN's David Brody has more on that for today's main thing.
These first 2 months of President Trump's second term have been filled with executive orders and perhaps none more controversial than the one creating DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
It's been clear from the get-go that President Trump has tasked Elon Musk and his DOGE team to go big when it comes to cutting waste in the federal bureaucracy. What's not so clear is whether the DOGE methods and results are constitutional.
This is a constitutional crisis. It's the most serious assault on our Constitution in the history of this country.
Much of the legal wrangling centers on Elon Musk. Is he simply an advisor to the president, or does he have true authority to make decisions and use that chainsaw? Jenna Ellis is with the American Family Association.
This is an issue, I think, that is very political at the outset, but when it gets to the court, it should be purely legal, and that is going to turn on how much actual authority Elon Musk has, or is he only in an advisory role?
If Musk has been granted that decision-making power, then DOGE may run afoul of the Constitution's Appointments Clause, which states that when a president wants to delegate authority, such as for a cabinet secretary, that person must be confirmed by the Senate.
The problem with DOGE is it seems to purport, according to Musk and the president, to be up to a much bigger project about restructuring the government, eliminating agencies, feeding them into the wood chipper, as Elon Musk has said. And if that is what it's doing, it runs into significant constitutional problems.
So is DOGE solely an advisory group, or is it more than that? Constitutional lawyer Kristan Hawkins is chief counsel for Liberty First Legal.
I think a great deal of the confusion comes from the name, because it's called the Department of, but it is not actually a department. Departments are limited by the Constitution, and they must be created by Congress.
I have created the brand new Department of Government Efficiency. DOGE.
The question then becomes, how is this informal advisory committee operating? Is it actually executing authority? Is it making decisions outside the presidential pen? If that's the case, then the courts are going to have to side with the Constitution that this is now operating like a department and not an informal advisory committee, and it's exceeding its authority.
Who's actually signing off on all of this, and what is the chain of command? Aren't those unanswered questions that need to get answered?
Well, they absolutely must get answered.
The White House sees this as all legally kosher, and that critics, including the media, need a history lesson.
Many people in this room who have used this talking point that Elon is not elected fail to understand how government works. So I'm glad for the opportunity for a brief civics lesson. The Constitution, Article 2, has a clause known as the vesting clause, and it says the executive power shall be vested in a president, singular. The whole will of democracy is imbued into the elected president. That president then appoints staff to then impose that democratic will onto the government.
Constitutional critics, however, still argue the White House can't even create DOGE without congressional approval. The administration labels DOGE as temporary and the reorganization of an already existing unit within the executive branch called the United States Digital Service. President Obama created it a decade ago to provide tech improvements to websites of federal agencies. Under the DOGE umbrella, however, the unit's mission is different and more expansive. In interviews, Musk often implies his team has authority.
One of the biggest functions of the DOGE team is just making sure that the presidential executive orders are actually carried out.
While on other occasions, he sounds like an advisor.
What we do is in consultation with the cabinet secretaries and with their departments.
As for President Trump's view, he wants cabinet secretaries to make the cuts, but there's a string attached.
Elon and the group are going to be watching them, and if they can cut, it's better. And if they don't cut, then Elon will do the cutting.
That kind of off-the-cuff presidential language could be problematic in court.
He's not a very specific communicator, and he enjoys speaking in hyperbole, which ends up creating confusion.
And then there's the paper trail issue.
We have a little saying in the legal field that if it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
This month, a federal judge ordered DOGE to release internal records to show its operating procedures and if they're going through the proper channels.
Every check that's made, every cut that's made, every decision that's made must be followed with a paper trail all the way back to the president.
So where might all of this leave DOGE?
Where do you think the courts are leaning in this, or is it hard to tell?
I think it's too soon to tell what any potential district court forum selection might determine. But I think ultimately, if and when this gets up to the U.S. Supreme Court, I think DOGE itself is fine. It'll be more of an independent case-by-case basis.
Those cases could lead to constitutional fights over the appointments clause, the vesting clause, privacy matters, and separation of powers. DOGE's current reach crosses into a large number of constitutional areas, and it very well could all lead to the United States Supreme Court for the final say. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
All right, David, appreciate that report there. Interesting stuff. We'll see how it all plays out. And that's going to leave us with time on the pod today for one last thing.
All right. So this is a simple one. Exodus 20:13, you shall not murder. As we're talking about abortion, I think it's a good reminder just of the reality of what we are called to love human life.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, too, to think about how Jesus upped the ante on that and more when saying if you have anger in your heart towards your brother, like that's the same as murder. You've essentially committed murder. So it's such a high standard on how we're to value others and to value life. So a good reminder on that one for sure here as we are on this Friday Junior edition of the Quick Start podcast, getting close to the week closing in on us. The weekend is rapidly approaching. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, and that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here tomorrow with more. God bless. See you then.